Food Coffee House in Redmond, Washington. We are on the last Wednesday night of the month. This is September 27, 2000 and whatever the year is, 2017. I'm still stuck in the 90s, I think. And we are here talking about October, and having written daily horoscopes for all of October already, all I can say is, no, it's not that bad, but it's, I've said this again and again and again. I keep feeling like a broken record because I keep saying, if you think it's strange or interesting, it's wait till next month. And next month is less strange than it is a powerful month with a lot of change, with a lot of dynamic change. In fact, of course I don't have my notes, but that's fine. I wrote an article that'll be the cover article for the next issue of the Mountain Astrologer. For those of you who don't know, the Mountain Astrologer, we astrologers affectionately call it TMA, the Mountain Astrologer. The next issue of TMA will be on the stands, I think, in November, and in it will be my forecast article for 2018. I can tell you that we've had stranger months, but we have some pretty stressful stuff coming up in October, and they're around very particular clusters of time, and we're going to focus on that a little bit for the same reason I focused on this concept that I'm going to share with you. I focused on this concept on my article, in my article for the Astrology of 2018. And the title of the article is 2018, Change is Inevitable, Growth is Optional. And that's basically what we have coming up, not only in October, but throughout the year. Before I jump into the astrology, just two things I want to mention in passing. One is that I will be doing my annual year ahead, co-creating the year, on the first weekend in January, as I do every year at Brighton Bush Hot Springs. This is a magical place in the old growth forest in Central Oregon, the old growth forest that took a hell of a beating this summer. Brighton Bush was under full evacuation. That's how close the fires were. They lost a month of business. It was a very difficult and sad time for the community. However, it has rained and the fires have been settled down, extinguished. The community is no longer under direct attack. It will be reopening. I think it's reopening today or this week. But that means that the annual co-creating the year ahead using astrology workshop will be on, and that will be January 5th through 7th, 2018. It's a limited registration. It will fill up. They do. In fact, the summer workshop filled up well over a month prior to the workshop. So if you're thinking about going, take a look at it online. Brighton Bush, BREITENBUSH, brightonbush.com. It's a very magical place. Even if you don't go there for my astrology workshop weekend, go there for something. It's like I say, it's if you live in the Northwest, it's one of the jewels of the Northwest. Brighton Bush Workshop, January 5th through 7th. The following Thursday night will be the monthly meeting of the Washington State Astrology Association, the WSAA. The Washington State Astrology Association is a local group that's been meeting for, probably about 40 years now, maybe even longer than that. I was the president of it a couple of years in a row back in the early 90s. And I will be their lecturer, speaker at their monthly meeting, the first monthly meeting in 2018. And I will be speaking on, what a surprise, the astrology of 2018. So if you are interested, you can find that either on Facebook, Washington Astrologers, the Washington State Astrological Association, and that is WSAA, or send me an email and I will give you more information. Okay, enough from the Department of Crass Materialism. We have a good turnout tonight. Thank you all for coming. Although we are here to talk about the astrology of October, I want to open up with two astrological concepts. One that is over by the time October begins and is exact today. Do people know what that is?
Uranus.
It's the Jupiter-Uranus opposition. We'll come back to that in a moment. It's too large of an event not to talk about, even though it's exact today, well actually today, tonight, or early tomorrow morning, depending where you are on the planet. So we're going to talk about the Jupiter opposition Uranus, number one. Number two, as I alluded to before I went into the topics of my upcoming workshops, I want to talk about a concept that most astrologers don't pay a whole lot of attention to, but as I wrote the article for 2018, I was like, I fell down this rabbit hole in research, and I think it has some great import for what's happening in October. And it's this. Simply stated, when planets move around and make exact aspects, let's say they line up in conjunction, or they form a square or an opposition, a stressful aspect. And I'm talking here the slower moving outer planets, the Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. When they make an aspect like that, they sensitize a point in the zodiac where that aspect took place. It's the same concept that astrologers employ when they talk about how eclipses actually have great impact for up to 6 months after the eclipse, that they're still functioning. So for all of those, for example, who are waiting for the other shoe to fall with respect to the craziness in Washington, D.C., and the fact that the Great American Solar Eclipse back in August of this year, which was at the same degree as Donald Trump's ascendant and very close to his Mars rising at the last degree of Leo in his chart, that just because those events haven't played through doesn't mean they're not going to, because eclipses often have ramifications for months after the actual time of the eclipse itself. And particularly when planets moving around make aspects or angles to the degree to the location of the eclipse itself. Now, let me just back up here just very briefly. The long story of what I'm going to tell you in a paragraph will be in my article in the Mountain Astrologer, so make sure you go out and buy it. Not yet, because it's not out. But the short version is this, that Uranus and Pluto align almost every other century, every century and 2/3 or so. It's about 170 year, 165 years, something like that. I may be off a few years. In the mid-1960s, in 1965 and 66, they aligned exactly at 16 and 17 degrees of Virgo. I know we have at least one person here with that alignment exact in his or her chart, since I won't give her away, but she's sitting right here. So when Uranus and Pluto aligned in 1965 and 1966 at 16 and 17 degrees of Virgo, they activated that point. And even though years later the planets had moved on, each in their own rhythms, The fact is that in 68, 69, 70, 71, even in 1972, when planets through the sky were moving exactly over that 16, 17 degree point in Virgo, or in fact the opposite point at 16 or 17 degrees of Pisces, or in fact the square points at 16 and 17 degrees of Sagittarius and Gemini, when planets were moving over those points, the same events that were activated when the planets were exact were brought back into our consciousness. And without kind of going into the details of the article, the fact is that things like the Watergate break-in occurred with the moon at exactly that degree. How do we know? Well, the Watergate break-in, there was an arrest when the guys were caught going in, going into the door. Security found them, and there was an exact, the time is exact, and the moon was at 16 degrees of Virgo. But the weird thing is that the events of the Vietnam War, the events of the Watergate, not only the break-in, the subsequent investigations, the televised hearings, and even up to the night of Nixon's resignation, that 16 and 17 degree Virgo point was activated in every one of those important charts, including within minutes the midheaven of Nixon's resignation speech that occurred at 9:01 p.m. on the night, I can't remember the date, in January, whenever it was. I don't have the date in my head. Even the day of the signing of the Paris Accord that ended the war in Vietnam, this degree shows up again and again and again and again. Why is this important? It's important because we've just come out of a several year period from 2012 to 2015, where Uranus and Pluto, those exact same two planets, were 90 degrees to one another 7 times, between about 9 to about 15 degrees of Aries and Capricorn. What this means is that the middle degrees of cardinal signs, Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, season starting signs. Aries starts spring, Cancer starts summer, Libra starts autumn, in the northern hemisphere, of course, and Capricorn starts winter. So when planets moving around through the sky move through that middle range of cardinal signs, Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn, they will conjoin, square, or oppose where Uranus and Pluto were in that 2012 to 2015 time. Are you with me here? Yeah. And because of that, for the next several years, aside from any aspects that are occurring in the sky itself, the fact is that we can watch these events from the turmoil and the change, the cultural, social, political, economic, sex, drugs, rock and roll craziness that we've seen unfold over the past several years is basically an after effect of what happened in that 2012 to 2015 period of time. And it doesn't get less. Just because this extraordinary aspect is in history now, it doesn't mean that the events are getting less potent. In fact, we're still in for another year or 2 or 3 at least of seeing these events resonate and become more potent, just like in the 60s when the Uranus-Pluto conjunction in 65 and 66 were still resonating in 68. By the way, the Democratic National Convention in 68 had that mid-Virgo degree all over it, but 68, 69, 70, 71, the Kent State shootings, the degree was all over at 72, Nixon's resignation, and was that not until 73? I can't remember. After all, I wrote that article a couple days ago. My brain is full. All right, so the reason why I wanted to mention this is that in October, we have a number of planets that will be moving through the middle of Libra and therefore squaring Pluto. Pluto is at, this is the chart for tonight. Actually, it's a chart for right now. And we have the moon in Capricorn, and we have Pluto at 16 degrees of Capricorn. And the sun, because we've already experienced the equinox in the northern hemisphere, the autumnal equinox, over the next couple of weeks, the sun will move through the middle degrees of Libra and square Pluto, and then it will oppose Uranus. In fact, right now we have Jupiter at the end of Libra opposing Uranus. It moves slower. It has already squared Pluto. We've talked about that several times over the past year here. But also during the month, we will see, no, we don't want. We will also see not only the sun moving through that degree and squaring Pluto and then opposing Uranus, but Mercury, which is moving faster than, well, which will catch up to the sun, Mercury will also square Pluto and oppose Uranus, as will Venus and Mars. So we have a period of time coming up when we're going to get a bit of that stress that we've seen again and again and again, and we're not done with it. All right. I don't know how I can have so many sheets of paper tonight and not the one that I had a few notes written on. Not that I need them, I know where we're going.
Is Mercury in retrograde?
Mercury is not retrograde. And we don't say Mercury in retrograde, we say Mercury retrograde. Just one of those linguistically things that I get a little crazy about.
That's very Mercury and Virgo of you to say that.
Huh?
That's very Mercury and Virgo of you to say that.
It may be, but although I don't have Mercury in Virgo, right now we have almost over the legal limit of planets in Virgo, where we have Mercury in Virgo at home in his, its own sign. After all, Mercury is a hermaphrodite and goes both ways. And then we have Venus and Mars, who are actually each going their own way. Venus going her own way and Mars going his own way. However, they're canoodling. And in fact, Venus and Mars have been traveling kind of close together these last days, weeks. And on October 5th, Venus, which is moving a little faster than Mars, as it usually does, Venus will catch up to Mars. And so we have the loveliness of having a Venus-Mars conjunction in Virgo on October 5th, which is an important day we'll get to in just a moment. Can anyone imagine why a Venus-Mars conjunction not is nice, but could be nice?
Balance of the masculine and feminine.
It's a balance of the masculine and feminine. Well, it's less a balance than a joining. But it is an aspect that can be very playful, creative. It's an aspect that does represent a combination, because whenever two planets join up in the sky, when they conjoin or conjunct, when they do that, it's like these two energies compress and try to get into the same place, which, if it's Venus and Mars, the cosmic lovers, that can be rather sweet. So, we have this Virgoan energy, which is quite intense right now. We have also the fact that Mars, over the past few days, opposed Neptune, and Venus is coming into opposing Neptune. And we'll talk about that just in a moment. But the thing I want to talk about before I really start running through the aspects of the month ahead is the fact that Jupiter today, right now, 27 degrees, 22 minutes. Uranus is at 27 degrees, 23 minutes. Later this evening or early tomorrow morning, Jupiter, slow moving, will lock into place and because of the retrograde motion, this will be the third and final time that Jupiter opposes Uranus. The first time was back around Christmas of 2016. The second time was the beginning of March 2017, March 2nd, and the third time is today. My friend Stephanie Gailing says that all of a sudden becomes the buzzword of the day, or of this period of time. One of my favorite phrases, which I know I've mused about from this podium before, from this stage, I guess there's no podium, is the idea of the astrological statement, prediction. Prediction just means to say before. Dictation, diction, to speak, before. So if you say something before it happens, you're predicting. But one of my favorite paradoxical astrological predictions is this: expect the unexpected. What's going to happen? But something will. So here's the thing. If you're in the middle of a storm and there's thunder and lightning and rain, you know that the lightning is going to strike, but you don't know where, and you don't know when. That's the unpredictable that you can predict. And so Uranus is the planet of the unpredictable. It's the electric shock that sparks, but you don't know when it's going to do it, but you know it's going to happen. The thing is that when Jupiter, the planet of expansion and making things bigger, Jupiter's a magnifying lens, Jupiter's an amplifier. When Jupiter opposes Uranus, there's a sense of this whole Uranian energy becomes even bigger. It's like the door opens wider. And in fact, it can open up opportunities. It can mean technological breakthroughs, but it also can mean surprises, things that, and it's not whether it's good or bad, it's just that the possibility of sudden change, of expecting the sudden, the all of a suddenness becomes in fact more intense, more stronger, more likely. And although we're now kind of coming out of that period of time, this is a slow enough and long-lasting enough aspect that it'll still be with us for a few days. And in some ways, this Jupiter-Uranus aspect, I think, has been one of the many contributors to the bizarre series of natural crises that we've been experiencing over these last weeks, that I think largely we can pin, at least largely, not completely, on the eclipse. This eclipse, often around eclipses, we see an increase in the frequency of severe earthquakes, storms, floods, fires, and obviously this month, in the last month and a half, or since the August eclipse, we've had way more than our fair share of floods, fires, and earthquakes, and in fact, and volcanoes. I've been in touch today with friends of mine who live in Bali, where, as many of you know, I spend a fair amount of time. In Bali, they've already evacuated close to 50,000 people because Mount Agung, which is the larger of the two volcanoes on the island, is in a high alert, and it's, again, expect the unexpected. It's not a matter of if right now, it's a matter of when. And the last time Agung erupted was in the early 1960s, and it killed a couple thousand people. So it's a serious situation, but we kind of look at things through a narrow filter, and we look at things through Houston and Naples, Florida, and Puerto Rico, and Barbuda, and we look at things through the lens of what's close to us, and we miss the fact that the entire Earth has been inundated with floods, mudslides. Sierra Leone, people killed in floods and mudslides. In northern India, thousands of people have been killed in floods. And we, through our little narrow information lens that feeds us back whatever it is we think is important, we miss the larger scheme of things, and yet we feel like we're being flooded with information and have more information at our hands than we've ever had before, but it's in very narrow bands of information that typically just feed back what we already know. We don't have to go there. There's another whole story. Okay, so this Uranus, the Jupiter-Uranus opposition is very important, but it'll begin to wind down as we move into and through October, and so let's move this forward a couple days until we get to October, and now we are at October 1st, and we open up October with Mars and Venus, one after another, making harmonious trines from mid-Earth sign Virgo to mid-Earth sign Capricorn, where Pluto is. And Mars trines Pluto on October 1st, and Venus trines Pluto on October 3rd. And then remember, Venus actually catches up with Mars on the 5th. And there it is right there. And so this little dance of Venus and Mars not only coming together, but trining Pluto is very powerful, because Pluto is the depth, the intensity, the bacchanalian urge for seeking pleasure and survival that comes from the lower chakras. It's the shadows, it's the unconscious, and when planets trine Pluto, their energy intensifies and deepens. And here, because it's in an Earth sign, it's in Virgo to Capricorn, we can expect the deepening of this energy to be rather practical. So this is a really sound time to do things that you want to have lasting impact, because we get some additional, what's the word I'm looking for? Persistence, endurance maybe is a better word, stamina maybe is even a better word from this energy. On October 5th, though, we have another thing that occurs, and that is the first lunation of the month. And we will add the moon into this. Oh, we got a bunch of stuff added. Let's get rid of the nodes, aspected planets. Let's go here. There we go. So here, as we hit the right there, close enough, 1241, right there, it's close enough. So the full moon on October 5th, which is a full moon in Aries, occurs on October 5th at 11:40 a.m. here in the Pacific Coast, which means that it's on the 6th at 11:12:12. You notice how I had to use my fingers, although you didn't see them actually moving. It occurs at 2:40. Oh no, that's a.m. I take this back. The full moon occurs at 11:40 a.m. On the Pacific Coast, and it occurs at 2:40 p.m. in the afternoon on October 5th on the East Coast. And this is a full moon in Aries. My friend Morgan Friday, who also writes for Tarot.com, said that this is the fire in the belly aspect. There's the sense of the internal warrior. The moon is our feelings, it's our inner sense, it's how we respond. Meanwhile, we have the sun and Mercury coming together in Libra, which is the sign of the relationship. And so the full moon in Aries is always a bit of a dilemma, because the moon in Aries is about how I feel, it's about how I react, it's my stuff, it's I, me, mine. Aries is the first sign of the zodiac, it's the baby of the zodiac that isn't so much selfish, it just doesn't know there's anything else but its own fingers and toes. It's different than the Leo, who knows there's other stuff out there but maybe doesn't care. That may not be fair, but it was a good line. Okay. So, when it comes to zodiacal insulting, I am an equal opportunity employer. I sooner or later will get everyone. And even the semi-mean stuff that I just said about Aries, as many of you know, I am an Aries and a half. which means I have a gazillion planets in Aries. All right, so we have the moon, the full moon in Aries, and the dilemma here is what's important. Is it my reaction, or is it my reaction to you that's important? In other words, the Libra-Aries axis is the axis of inner and outer. It's the axis of self and not self. Libra is the reflection point. Libra is the mirror on the wall. Well, when I look in the mirror, what do I see? Me. When you dance in a relationship, what do you see? You. You know, that's all relationships are reflections. And of course, if your own awareness is not developed, then the things you see externally seem to be external. In other words, you mistake what you're seeing out there for things out there, when actually there is no out there out there. The out there that's out there is really in here. I know that's confusing, but it's accurate. And so what happens is that in relationships, we actually have this dance with the inner and the outer, but nothing can be reflected back to us unless we already have some ability to resonate to that. If you can, you know, you can't hear a note. If someone played a note that was 7 cycles per second, or 120,000 cycles per second, you would hear nothing. Why do you hear a note, that is 440 cycles a second? It's because your ear has little filaments, fibers, that can resonate to 440 cycles a second. If you can't resonate to it on the inside, it doesn't exist on the outside. This is the Aries-Libra dilemma. And yet we go into relationship, and there is a something out there that's out there. And yet it becomes incumbent in a full moon to gain awareness around what out there is actually mine and what out there is actually yours. Because we can learn to be perceptive to things that we're not normally resonant to. And this is where the work and where the magic of a relationship takes place, is in those areas that push us out of ourself into the area of not self. So here we have the full moon in Libra that is not only opposite the sun. All full moons are opposite the sun. I'm sorry I said full moon in Libra. I meant full moon in Aries opposed the sun in Libra. But we also have that full moon in Libra opposing Mercury. And so this is a clue that during this full moon, communication is important. Now, it might be said that communication is always important. I would not disagree with that. I love the George Bernard Shaw, I think, who said that the greatest, the most important thing about communication is the illusion that it took place. But there is something here about that dance in relationship, and when you add to it the fact that we still have this Venus and Mercury that are exact, that Venus, who's Mars's consort, that this energy of this creative Venus is what you like and what you're attracted to, and in the 21st century, we know that although we say Venus she and Mars he, we're not talking about what sex organs you wear. We're talking about an archetypal concept of yin and yang, of that actually has to do with Venus, that which you like, whether you're male or female, that which you're attracted to, that which you're not attracted to. Venus is the antenna that has to do with an aesthetic sense of attraction-repulsion. Mars is the physical, how am I going to get it? Mars is the polarizing factor. Venus has no pole. Venus, yeah. Boom. Sorry about that one. All right. If I was Robin Williams, I would go somewhere now. But I'm not.
Great.
Venus, astrologically, Venus has to do with oils and sugars, chemically. Oils and sugars are non-polar, as opposed to Mars, which has to do with proteins. Proteins are bipolar. And I don't mean that in a clinical sense of psychological conditions. I mean that proteins have, like a magnet, a North Pole and a South Pole. When you put a whole bunch of proteins together, what happens is, and here I'm getting this from the work of my dear friend and brilliant biologist Bruce Lipton, that proteins in their bipolarity have a side that's hydrophilic and a side that's hydrophobic, which means that there's a side of a protein that's attracted to water and a side that's not. And what happens when you put a whole lot of proteins together, they self-organize so that the parts that are not attracted to water go together, so that the parts that are attracted to water face outward. They create what we call a cell wall, and therefore they actually have a self-organizing principle, as opposed to sugars and oils that are dispersive. And here we have the basic difference between Venus and Mars. Venus is assimilative, is that a real word? Assimilatory. But there's a word there. I don't know what it is. What is it? Assimilating. Whatever. Venus assimilates, Venus disperses, Venus melts. Venus does not create borders and boundaries. Mars, on the other hand, creates borders and boundaries so it can defend them, or it can offend, meaning it can go on offense and extend its borders and boundaries further. Do you understand what we're saying here? So when Venus and Mars align, this can be magic because it can be very creative. That which I like, that which I think is beautiful, I can create. I can manifest. Or if you're a woman, womanifest. All right, moving right along, October 8th, let's see here, we're at an hour, let's go back to a day at a time. By October 8th, we get the next, all right, well, we have something here, though, that's another piece of this full moon that I just want to mention, is the fact that it's coming into that period of time where the Sun and then Mercury are going to square Pluto. Do you see that? And the full moon is squaring Pluto. And then a day later, the full moon is, well, the day after the full moon, it'll catch up with Uranus. So let's just move this ahead a day. But why I'm showing that is that this full moon will also exacerbate the whole Uranus-Pluto square dynamic of the social, cultural, evolutionary, political, economic, blah, 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 changes that we've been seeing for the past half a decade or so. So we'll see that come back, kick back up a notch toward that full moon around the 5th. As we move forward, I'm going to take the aspects off the moon just because they get noisy. Aspect points and no moon. There we go. And as we move on, by the 8th, we can see that first Venus and then Mars will square Saturn. Can you see what I'm talking about here? Saturn has gone retrograde. It's back to about 22 degrees of Sagittarius. It is now, Saturn is now direct again, and it is making a run toward Capricorn. Next month we'll talk about Saturn and Capricorn. It actually doesn't go into Capricorn until December. I think it's at the end of November. I'm not sure right now, but I think it's December. Does anybody know?
December.
Huh?
End of December.
End of December, thank you. But Saturn back at 22 degrees of Sagittarius right now, that this first Venus and then Mars will square Saturn. This is not a nice time. Well, it can be very useful, and it can be very helpful in making things real, but it also can be a bit frustrating because it feels like we're plowing ahead and then all of a sudden something says stop. We run into a wall. Saturn is that wall that is created by Mars making these boundaries in effect. Saturn can be like the Great Wall of China. It can be like the glass ceiling. Saturn can be the speed limit. Saturn can be the cop who arrests you for doing something wrong. Saturn can be dad who's pissed off and basically is enforcing, the rules of the household or whatever. I'm sure there are many other things, but Saturn basically is a game stopper. The mistake is to think that Saturn is bad. When you or I are the person who's being stopped, we're often not happy. But, as Jeff used to say, if he was here on stage with me still, Jeff would say, Saturn is the planet who says no but means yes, to which I would always say, he doesn't mean on a date. Because what Jeff means is that Saturn basically says no to slow you down or to stop you, so you have to get your act together even more. Saturn wants to help. Saturn wants to make things that endure, that last. And often when we do things quickly or shoddily, that often they happen and then they disappear. But when we bump into Saturn, Saturn says, whoa, think this through, make it right. Whether it's a Saturn return, whether it's Saturn in the sky, coming around in your chart to the sign of your sun or your moon, when we interact with Saturn, we usually hit some resistance. And resistance needs to be overcome. And often it's not overcome by force. It's the old work smarter, not harder. So we have Venus squaring Saturn on October 8th and Mars squaring Saturn on October 11th. And during this period of time, we certainly will have some of those resistances to face, to overcome, to deal with, but there's another little piece that makes this even, I would say, more difficult, but it can, and that is the fact that by October 9th, the Sun, first Mercury on the 9th, and then the Sun actually also on the 9th, later that day, Mercury and the Sun hit the degrees that square Pluto. Can you see that? Mercury and the Sun. Mercury is slightly ahead of the Sun here, but in one day, the Sun moves 1 degree and Mercury moves almost 2. That the Sun and Mercury together square Pluto, and Pluto again is the deep, dark secrets, the underworld, the unconscious, the subconscious. And the Sun and Mercury are saying, in Libra, it's a relationship. Let's talk about it. Let's bring it out into the open. And all of a sudden, you bring it out into the open and you realize you've unleashed Pandora's box, Darth Vader, whatever. There's a darker energy. Now, the bad news is that when Mercury and the Sun square Pluto, it can certainly be a dance with the dark side, intense energy, powerful, not necessarily easy, especially because we're also just coming off of that Venus-Mars squaring Saturn. This is a difficult period of time. However, the rule is that once something is out in the open, it's easier to deal with than when it was hidden. Now, it doesn't always feel that way when something just comes out into the open. But the fact of the matter is that stuff that we hide from ourselves, whether we do it consciously, that's suppression, or unconsciously, we have no clue we're doing it, that's repression. When stuff that is buried down deep, that stuff has more hold and holds more sway, holds more power over us. This is what therapy is about. You go into the underworld. This is the Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. You go into the darkness. The cave that you fear, Campbell said, is the cave that holds the treasures that you need. That, in other words, when you go into the darkness and you bring stuff out, when you shine the light of the sun and Mercury into the darkness, then you can actually work with the energy. It's not as scary when you see the boogeyman during the day that when you don't see it, but you know it's there at night. One other last thing I want to say about the Sun Mercury squaring Pluto, and that is there's a whole mythology around Mercury being the psychopomp. When short version of the story, you can Google this and read a lot about it. But when Pluto, which is Latin for Hades, Greek, abducted Persephone from her home where she lived with her mom, Ceres, the goddess of the grain of the fertile earth. When Pluto slash Hades took Persephone into the underworld, and Ceres went, oh my God, the earth's gone barren, I'm mourning, there's nothing growing anymore. Ceres went to Jupiter, the king of Olympus, and said, go rescue my daughter. Mick Jagger took her away in a black limo. Darth Vader, the bad, All right. Well, Jupiter was a bit helpless because he couldn't go into the underworld, nor could anyone else cross the river Styx, except Mercury. You see, Mercury has no substance, it's just message. And so Mercury, as the psychopomp, as the messenger, could quicksilver-like go back and forth between this world and the other world. Mercury became the first shuttle diplomat. And there's a longer story here that I would love to tell about when Freud tried to use hypnosis after going to France and seeing Charcot hypnotize someone who remembered something that he couldn't remember when he wasn't hypnotized. And Freud went back to Vienna and tried to hypnotize someone because that he felt was part of the cure that he was looking for conversion hysteria, which was kind of the badass disease of his day. And he couldn't hypnotize anyone. He was lousy at it, so he developed what we call talk therapy. Google it. Talk therapy is nothing more than the therapist sending Mercury talk into the underworld, the unconscious, to rescue Persephone.
That's good.
So, we have an opportunity with this square. Spent too much time there, but it's all interesting stuff. All right, so let's move on. The 9th, 10th, 11th is a bit of a tough period of time. Oh, we also have here Venus opposing Chiron. I don't often spend a lot of time on Chiron here, only because there's so many stories, so many things going around the sun. Chiron is important. It's the wounded healer. There's a whole story, maybe some evening. We'll just spend an evening talking about Chiron. It's not because I don't think Chiron is important. It's only because the hour or so we have once a month is limited. But Venus and then Mars opposing Chiron, Venus on the 10th and Mars on the 15th, again confronts us with our wounds, especially in relationship. We're being confronted by where we're less than, where we're less than what we want to be. And so this whole period of time is not an easy period of time. That Mars square Saturn that's exact on the 11th, this can be a story of frustration. We put ourselves in the measure and we don't stand up to what our self-perception is or what someone else's expectations are, and we might feel our self-esteem suffering during this period of time. Now on the 14th, let's back up because we skipped on the 10th, an incredibly important piece. And this could be an entire discussion of the evening, and that is that Jupiter takes about 12 years to go around the sun once, which means it spends about 1 year in each sign. It's my contention that the whole idea of Chinese astrology is really based upon the cycles of Jupiter. Now, it's not based upon the connection to it moving through the sky in the zodiac, but see, Jupiter spends a year in each sign. And in the Chinese astrological system, each year has a different name. And Jupiter is the planet that's related to social contracts. Jupiter is the expansive planet that moves us beyond our personal stuff. Our personal stuff, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars. Sun, who we are. Moon, how we respond. Mercury, how we think and interact and talk. Venus, what we like and don't like. Mars, how we get it. That was an oversimplification. But in each of those cases, they're personal. They're about me and my interactions with the world. With Jupiter, which is a huge step out beyond Mars. Huge step. All of a sudden, we're out of the personal realm and we're into the social realm. Jupiter is, like I said, social contracts. It's philosophy, it's ideas, it's expansive, it's travel to far places where we've never been. Can you kind of see the theme here? How Jupiter opens us up beyond the individual? Well, the Chinese culture, more than any other culture on the planet, is connected, wrapped around the archetype of Jupiter. It's not about the individual, it's about the social system. Going back to even Confucius, to the I Ching, it's all about the relationship between the individual and the larger system. And so when Jupiter, who spends a year in each sign, changes signs, that's a shift. That's an important shift. And it may take an entire year for us to feel it, but we're coming out of a year of Jupiter in Libra, where relationships, relationships were emphasized. In some way, they grew. There was a magnifying lens around the dance. And relationship doesn't necessarily mean an intimate or friendly or business relationship. And a relationship with your nemesis or with an enemy is in fact a relationship. In fact, in astrology, the 7th house, the house that's connected with the archetype of Libra, is in traditional astrology, it's the house of marriage and open enemies. And I remember the Oscar Wilde line who says, your enemy will stab you in the back, a friend will stab you in the front. And I might not have that exactly right. But the point is that an open enemy is very different than a hidden enemy, which astrologically is more a 12th house issue. But the point is that as Jupiter moves into Scorpio, there's a very subtle and yet powerful shift that we move into this need for deeper meaning, need for understanding things that are not on the surface. Watch for things in that middle of October when Jupiter moves into Scorpio for lots more things, as if there hasn't been enough already, lots more things that were hidden coming out in the open in a way that you can't suppress them, because Jupiter holds that magnifying lens into the areas of the universe that are otherwise out of sight or hidden, scorpionic. All right, by October 14th, Venus moves into Libra. And in fact, we get Venus moving into Libra on the 14th, and then we get Mars moving into Libra on the 22nd. And so we're getting this energy of autumn even in a larger flavor. And yet we're also getting through the middle and ending of October, we're getting a little run of energy from Libra into Scorpio, where we have first Mercury on the 17th, and then the Sun on the 22nd. I'm going to run through this. There's Mercury into Scorpio, and the Sun moving into Scorpio on the, slow down, there we go, the Sun on the, what did I say, on the 22nd. Now, what happens is that when Mercury and the Sun, one at a time, move from Libra into Scorpio, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to see Jupiter and go, cool, dude. Because Jupiter is beneficent. It's the bigger, better, more. It's the grandiose. And in Scorpio, it's basically saying there's a lot of juice to the hidden realms, whether they're sexual or intimate or occulted, mysterious, hidden in whatever way. And as Mercury moves into Scorpio, as Mercury moves into Scorpio on the 17th and then joins up with Jupiter on the 18th, and then the Sun moves into Scorpio on the 22nd and joins up with Jupiter on the 26th. These are days where the energy is expanded, and we're getting a sense of the power and the magnificence of bringing things up from the hidden realms so that we can see them, so we can actually work with those energies. Now, along the way, we have one other piece. Remember, every planet that first squares Pluto will then oppose Uranus. And so we have Mercury opposing Uranus on the 14th. This is a bit of craziness. This is a bit of, again, the lightning striking. Followed by the Sun opposing Uranus on the 19th. The Sun opposing Uranus on the 19th. And before it moves into Scorpio, but then that Sun lines up with Jupiter. We also have a new moon in there, and this new moon happens at the very end of Libra. Let's zone in on that on our way. There it is right there. The actual new moon is at 12:11 p.m. Pacific time. That's 11 p.m. Eastern Time on October 19th, and this new moon happens at the last degrees of Libra. But we have the theme that keeps coming back, and that is that this new moon in Libra is exactly, well, the technical word in astrology is partile. Partile means that whether it's exact or not, it's the same number degree. So we have the Sun and Moon at 26 degrees, actually, and 37 minutes of Libra, and Uranus at 26 degrees and 31 minutes of Aries. So this new moon in Libra, which really sets the seed for the autumn energy, even though it's already a month, almost a month into autumn, it's the seed period of planting a seed in the relationship realm. However, it's opposite, independent, eccentric, erratic, brilliant Uranus in Aries, back to that sign of I, me, mine. This will be the last new moon for 7 years, well actually for 80 some odd years, that will be opposite Uranus in Aries, because by next year, that new moon on this side will be opposite Uranus, which will have moved on into Taurus. And we will talk about Uranus and Taurus in a month or so, but that's largely part of the flavor of 2018. So this new moon is a very powerful moon. Not only is it opposite Uranus, but we're getting this cluster of energy around Jupiter, and the changing of the light and easy, the delicately balanced relationship between me and you, good and evil, light and dark, that occurs in Libra, and it's all of a sudden changing into a heavier, more serious game. You know, as the Sun moves into Scorpio, and the holiday of Scorpio is Halloween, which is a celebration of the thinning of the veil, where the energy from the dark side is actually coming through and is existing here in this plane. And that's what happens in Scorpio. You see, in Libra, where we are now, it's like if we lived up in New England, this would be the time of year when all the sugar maples would be absolutely, it would look like being inside of, I grew up in that area. It was like living, in October, it was like living inside of a box of tricks. You know, because the sugar maples were yellow and red and brown and still some green, and there were no blue ones. But the colors were all brilliant and distinct. We don't get that so much here with the aspens and certainly with the evergreens. But Libra has that sense, like today, where it just feels like everything is in harmony. It feels in balance. When the sun moves into Scorpio, all of a sudden all those pretty leaves turn brown and shrivel up and they're fucking dead. No, I mean, it's a big difference. And you see, we look at it and go, oh, it's over, it's done. But Scorpio is the gateway drug to rebirth. Because in Scorpio, the life force is cut off of that which is no longer necessary. So the leaves shrivel up and die. But the life force energy goes in and down and deep. And there it does some serious mojo. It encounters some magic shit. That literally shit, because Scorpio is, you know, it has to do with all that which is not needed. But it encounters the magic where death gets recycled into life. Anyone here gardeners? Okay, the compost pile we're talking about. You know, there are gardeners who love, you know, their roses and their flowers in the summer, and then there are gardeners who love creating the soil that gives life to the garden. This is Scorpio. This is that process of the earthworms turning the refuse into something that's alive, that feeds the energy that creates the birth again in spring. So the point here is that as we move into this time of year, especially because Jupiter's going to stay in Scorpio for the entire year, all the other planets are going to move around and Jupiter's holding that anchor in Scorpio all year. And first when Mercury, then the Sun, then Venus, and then Mars each take their turns moving into Scorpio, lining up with Jupiter and holding that point, we get this sense of the power of that which is not what we see, but still the power of the invisible that creates the rebirth back in spring when the planets start moving through Aries the following spring. All right, we need to move along. We got the new moon here, we've done that. We got the sun moving into Scorpio on the 22nd, and then lining up with Jupiter, and we got that. That's on October 26th. Toward the end of the month, we have, we also have the fact that Mars moves from Virgo into Libra, so that Mars in Libra is the strategist. The book, The Chinese Art of War, martial arts, Mars, martial art, Venus. Venus, Mars together have to do with this, the strategizing, the dance, playing Go or playing chess, or General Eisenhower, who in some ways calculated and won World War II, at least on the European front. He was a gentle Libran who, who looked easygoing and gentle, but he was a brilliant strategist, because we often write Libran off as wishy-washy and we don't, no, Librans are the most brilliant strategists of the zodiac. And when it comes to war, strategy is way more important than the Aries hitting the first punch or the Scorpio hitting the last punch. And so as Mars moves into Libra, we may see this whole dance of strategy and of war occurring more in the diplomatic realms than we have previously. And then the month ends as we get to the 27th, we begin to see Venus making its square with Pluto. There we go. Venus, and again, as when the Sun and Mercury hit those mid-cardinals, when Venus hits the mid-cardinal, first squaring Pluto, and then opposing Uranus, but not until November. Again, we'll see that stress, that dance come back up of some of the deeper stuff coming back up from underneath. So, it's an interesting month because A, there's no retrogrades. B, there's no eclipses. There are some outer planet changes, meaning Jupiter only changes signs once a year, and so there's a subtle but very powerful shift of the zeitgeist around the planet. That Jupiter moving into Scorpio, we might not only feel, but we might sense in current events and so on because of the faster moving planets that line up with it, within the same few weeks as it moves into the new sign. But the other thing is these planets that are squaring Pluto and opposing Uranus that I think bring up again and again and again the stresses and the conflicts that have already surfaced that are not yet ready to go away. And I think that in October we get another round of them, but I think they're a different flavor because the Jupiter in Scorpio is giving us this vision to be able to see a bit deeper, to go a bit deeper, and to uncover things that previously weren't there. Oh, there is one other thing I want to mention that's a subtle but I think important background note. We see another outer planet aspect that I think is tough to nail. It's difficult to talk about, but it's slow moving enough. We're talking about a semisquare, which is a half square. A square, an opposition is a half of the cycle, right? Opposition halfway around. A square is a half of a half. A semi-square is a half of a half of a half. Every time you half something, I don't mean have something, I mean half something, you create another level of stress, of anxiety, of conflict, of stress. And so a semi-square is a subtle but present tension, stress between, in this case, Uranus and Neptune. These are slow-moving planets. They're not personal. They're transpersonal. They're archetypal. They're out there in the cultural zeitgeist. Second time I used the word zeitgeist. It's a zeitgeisty day. I don't know. Uranus is about these unstable, deep, powerful changes that happen like lightning. The revolution, shock, and surprise. Neptune is very difficult to put your finger on because when you put your finger on Neptune, you put your finger on it, it goes right through it. There's nothing there. Neptune is dreams and illusion. But don't for a moment think that an illusion is not real.
Oh boy, that's tricky.
No, it's very important because the mistake is to believe illusions are unreal. But the fact of the matter, quoting William Blake, what is now proved was once only imagined. Caroline Casey says, imagination lays the tracks for the reality train to follow. You see, Neptune is in a way, it's the dream realm, it's the spiritual, it's the metaphysical, it's the imagination, but that creates the scaffolding for the crystallization of reality to manifest. So we have Uranus forming a half square with Neptune, which is kind of creating this background of unrest in the metaphysical realms that's creating things happening erratically. It's back to the unexpected happening, but we don't know when, and yet things are going on. Now, this Uranus half square to Neptune, because it's a slow-moving aspect, goes in and out of phase 5 times from August of 2017, which obviously already has occurred. That was around August 11th, so near the eclipse. The second of 5 of these is on October 7th, 2017, hence we're talking about it now. The third is on June 16th, 2018. The fourth is on December 15th, 2018. And the fifth and final is on May 1st, 2019. Now, what I'm saying here, and we'll revisit this discussion when we have more data points to know what happened back around the eclipse and what happened now in the first part of October, to be able to project ahead to next year, 2018 and 2019. But I'm just making the case for, aside of everything else that we've talked about, there's this background of things happening outside of our realm of perception, in the realm of imagination, that's crackling and snapping and popping, and yet we haven't seen the manifestation of it yet. So, here we are on the cusp of October. We've had fires like we've never seen in the Northwest. Matter of fact, not just in the Northwest United States, but in Portugal, in Romania, there have been fires, in Italy, there have been fires like it's been a fire season, how do I say this, from hell. Fires. We've seen floods, and we're not necessarily done with the flooding season yet, but we've seen floods that are crazy, that are cracking the political system of stability. So we've seen fires, we've seen flood. I've seen fire and I've seen rain, I hear James Taylor singing. But we've seen earthquakes. We have volcanoes cooking. We have toddlers who are having pissing matches and holding nuclear weapons. We are standing at a precipice. I'm not trying to paint a pretty picture, but I'm also not trying to paint a picture of panic. I mean, we'll go on, one way or another. We'll get through this, we'll look back and we'll go, oh my God, do you remember 2017? Oh God, what a, like many of us do when we look back at the late 60s. We go, oh my God, can you believe that we really did that and got through that? We'll get through this. But it's important as we move through this time and as we move through October, especially since we're getting personal stress from the planets squaring Pluto and opposing Uranus, that we remember that there's an out there, that's separate from us, that we're perceiving, and yet by putting our own individual lives in balance, we can actually right some of that energy. In fact, the only way to fix what's out there is to fix what's in here. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't work on both levels. A strong case can be made for that, and we each need to do what we feel we need to do. But as an astrologer, I'm here to say that the various stressful aspects that we've talked about tonight all can be dealt with at home. And by just projecting outward and fixing them out there, you're not going to fix the root cause, because as Jung wrote, war will not come to an end by treaties. It will come to an end when the individuals don't have wars going on inside their heads and no longer projecting them. So here we are, like I said, at the cusp of October. Go out there, be safe. This will be up on YouTube by Friday. You can check my Facebook page or stariq.com. I have business cards here if you want to get a hold of me. And I think that fulfills my contractual obligations for the evening. Thank you all very much.